Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you'll be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. If you've been inspired by the guests that we've had on the podcast, please like, subscribe, comment, hit notification bells, whatever you can do on the platforms that you're listening on, so that more people have the opportunity of hearing these and engaging in our community. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne. Our guest today is Aryeh. Now Aryeh, for people that don't know who you are, could you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
So I'm, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm a paramedic with Israel's national emergency rescue organization called Magen David Adom, and I work with our international relations department as well.
Okay, and then I know Magen David Adom have volunteers and different things that people can get involved with as well. I guess maybe some place they can find information in terms of what they've been doing since October 7th. But could you just say a bit about where people can find out more?
So I'll just give you a brief background, and then I'll tell you where you can find a little bit more about the organization as well. Magen David Adom, like I said, is Israel's national emergency medical service organization. We actually undertake about 4 different major roles, and we have supporters from across the world. We are a government-mandated organization, but we are not government-funded. So a lot of the funding that comes into Magen David Adom actually comes from supporters from around the world. So wherever you are in the world, if you look up Magen David Adom online, you'll find information about us. You can go straight to our website, which is mdais.org, and you'll find information there as well.
Perfect. And I'll put those links in the description box, or at least some of them. So if you're listening, you want to go check those out, they'll be there ready for you. Aryeh, a lot of people know about what's been going on in Israel since October 7th with the initial attack, the terrorist attack from Hamas, and some of the things that happened in those next few days and Israel's response since. Maybe slightly lesser known is what exactly happened to Magen David Adom, the ambulance service, and how that directly impacted you in those first few days, as well as what you've been doing as a response to that. And now obviously things are going off in the north and different areas. But maybe before we get to that and we start diving into some of those things, could you just tell people a bit about where you were on October 7th and how you started to find out what was going on and how you responded initially?
So the events of October 7th started about 6:30 in the morning, 6:29 if you want to be precise. And within moments, I knew something big was happening because my phone started sending lots of rocket alerts, red alerts. So there's an app that I have on my phone that warns us about rocket alerts. And that was the first I started to hear. And then communication started coming through from Magen David Adom about this incident. For the first few moments, there was a thought that there was perhaps a malfunction actually with the red alert system, because it just didn't make sense. We weren't expecting anything. That it was a complete shock that there were suddenly hundreds and hundreds of rockets being fired into Israel. Within minutes, we started receiving calls in Magen David Adom about casualties. And we started receiving calls also from our volunteers and from our staff from around the country, telling us exactly what was going on in their kibbutz, in their town, in their city, wherever they were. Magen David Adom is the largest volunteer organization in the country. We have 3,200 members of staff, employees, but we also have 33,000 volunteers. So we literally cover the entire country. As an EMS system, an emergency medical service system, we have 200 stations across the country. We have dispatch centers also across Israel, that all respond within seconds. And what happened within the first few moments was that Magen David Adom realized very, very quickly what was happening. Certainly that it was something extraordinary, even if we didn't understand initially the numbers that were involved. And we ensured that of our 1,400 ambulances and intensive care units, about 350 of those were on shift on that Friday night, and they were about to go home at 7 a.m. The day shift was on its way in, so we actually doubled our numbers very, very quickly. But we also made sure that every single emergency vehicle was manned within minutes, within less than an hour. Every single ambulance, every single intensive care unit, emergency medicycles, helicopters, whatever it was manned across the entire country. What that meant was that our staff also were then actually right in the line of fire. I started off the day at home, and later on during that day, I headed down to, I live in central Israel, and I headed down to the south a few hours later. And we came under rocket fire on several occasions. We dealt obviously with casualties of the rocket fire. But colleagues of mine actually came under fire directly from the terrorists. They came face to face with the terrorists. 5 of our colleagues were killed on the 7th of October in the first few hours, including a paramedic who was working in a makeshift clinic, including an EMT who was driving the ambulance towards the music festival. Hamas actually had plans. We have the actual plans that they had written out, specifying that they were targeting Magen David Adom. You know, when we hear talk about war crimes and civilians being targeted, but what has kind of escaped the world news, I think, a little bit, is the fact that Magen David Adom, as a humanitarian organization, as an ambulance, as a medical organization, was also directly targeted, and it meant that several of our members of staff were injured, and like I said, 5 were killed. 16 of our ambulances were destroyed. All of this within the sort of the first 24 hours. But what also happened was the fact that we were able to respond in such a way that we reached and we treated and evacuated about 1,000 casualties within the first 24 hours or so. Some of that was due to the fact that we have incredibly brave members of staff who went with bulletproof ambulances into the south, into places like Sderot, the city where there was one of the towns that was very heavily affected. And they were evacuating casualties out, taking them to rendezvous points, to regular ambulances that are not bulletproof, that were stationed just outside where the terrorists were, but still very much within striking range of rockets. And it was a situation that was almost impossible. And despite that fact, we had people who were willing to go in wherever they were needed to go and treat and evacuate the casualties, anyone who needed it. We evacuated, I can talk for myself. One of the sites we got to was a family home that had been hit by a rocket. And there were 4 members of that family, two parents, 2 little kids. And there were 4 of us on the ambulance as well. So then we had to kind of get 4 people into this ambulance. The family were all injured. And we had to get them to hospital as quickly as we possibly could. And one of my main concerns was not just treating their injuries and making sure that they made it to hospital in one piece, but also the fact that if there was a rocket alert while we were on the way to hospital, I then had to work out how to get 8 people off of an ambulance in a very, very short period of time. We're talking seconds. I was in Ashkelon at the time, and they have a maximum of 15 seconds from when the red alert siren starts until there could be a rocket strike. And it was, like I said, an almost impossible situation, but something that Magen David Adom has trained for. We might not have been prepared for it to happen when it did happen, but we've undertaken many drills over the years. We've had a lot of experience, unfortunately, with multi-casualty incidents. Nothing on this scale by any stretch of the imagination. Nevertheless, using the knowledge, the skills, the experience we've built up over the years, we were able to deal with it in a way that nobody else could have done.
I guess I was going to say the good thing about this is not that there is much good to look at in this situation. I guess most of the people that work for Magen David Adom have also served in the military.
Not necessarily. A lot of the people who are in Magen David Adom are there as part of their national service, right? So not everybody who does national service in this country does military national service. There is also sort of a civilian avenue. And a lot of the people who were on those ambulances were 18, 19, 20-year-old paramedics who were doing that, who were on the national service, or they were volunteers. A lot of people have done military service. But again, once you're on an ambulance, your role is not a military role in any way, not a security role. Your role is to save lives.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking in terms of mentally, they're
So,
driving into the fight, right? Whereas
right,
that's not necessarily what they were wanting to do.
absolutely. So that is true from that point of view. But again, once we've put on kind of this uniform gives you a completely different mindset. It's a kind of I guess a shield of armor, but in a very different sort of way. And again, throughout the years, unfortunately, this country has experienced a lot of very traumatic incidents, whether we're talking about terror attacks, whether we're talking about previous wars. So it kind of exists at the back of everybody's mind. Nevertheless, as a paramedic, as an EMT, the last thing you want to be doing is running into a scene where there's still live gunfire. And again, nevertheless, people were doing that, and knowing that what they were doing was vitally, vitally important.
Yeah.
Is there any correlation at all between Magen David Adom and the Red Cross? Is there any correlation?
There is. Magen David Adom, so I mentioned earlier on that Magen David Adom performs 4 major roles within the state of Israel. Role number 1 is the EMS organization, the Emergency Medical Services. Role number 2 is that we are Israel's blood bank, right? We are the blood services for the state of Israel. Role number 3 is that we are, like I said before, the largest volunteer organization. So we have also starting from youth volunteers from the age of 15 up. And role number 4 is that we are Israel's national Red Cross society. Right? So we are members of the Red Cross. And that's put us in a very, very difficult position over the last 10 months. I'm sure you're aware of the strain there is between the state of Israel and the Red Cross. The role we fulfill under the flag of the Federation of the Red Cross means that as a national society, we are able and we are asked to go to different sites to provide humanitarian aid. And that throughout the years, it's been across the world. So from Philippines to Haiti to the States after Hurricane Katrina to more recently Turkey after they had their massive earthquake, to Ukraine, all sorts of different sites where we are able to provide humanitarian aid. And we do that under the flag of the Red Cross as part of our duties as a Red Cross national society. So in exactly the same way there is a British Red Cross and an American Red Cross, there is also an Israeli Red Cross, and that's us, right? That's Magen David Adom. There is the other kind of umbrella of the Red Cross, which is the International Committee of the Red Cross, and they are the ones who are supposed to be dealing with the hostages, with prisoners of war, etc. Unfortunately, the role they've filled during this war has left something to be desired, I think is probably the best way I can put it at this point. It's put us in a very difficult position. Nevertheless, we still have a role to fill. And when people ask, why do we stay within the Red Cross? Why do we do this? Why do we perform this role? There's a very simple answer: because it needs doing and because we can. And again, we have the skills and the knowledge and the experience and the ability. And if we can go and help in other countries, we'll do so. Even if that country might be something like Turkey, where the relations between the two countries are really very strained, especially since October. Nevertheless, the first country to jump, the first organization to jump when they had their major earthquake was the state of Israel, was Magen David Adom, to say, we're here, we want to offer help. How can we come and help? And I'm not sure how aware you are. There was an incident a few weeks ago with an Israeli flight, an El Al flight, that was having technical issues, and they landed in Turkey, and Turkey wouldn't even let them refuel, so they had to then do another kind of jump across to somewhere else to get refueled to be able to make it back to Israel. And again, it'd be very easy to turn around and say, "You're not going to help us. We don't want to help you either." It's just not the way that we live our lives. It's not what we believe. If we are able to help whoever it is, we'll be there to help.
Boy, there's some things being said here that we could go down all kinds of rabbit trails and spend the next 3 hours dissecting some of that stuff. You said earlier that Hamas knew where your posts were in the south, in the kibbutz and those areas. Can you just explain a bit about how they knew where they were, but also how you then knew that they knew where they were?
So how we knew is very simple. We found, the security services found plans, printed maps, and instructions, giving them directions exactly to the ambulance station, for example, in Sderot. If you know the story, the battle of the police station in Sderot, about a dozen police officers were killed in the battle for that station, and the only way they could eventually kind of win that battle was they razed that building to the ground. Their plan was to do exactly the same with the Magen David Adom station. They were trying to get into the station, to take hostages, to injure and kill anybody who was in that building. They had information. We can make kind of educated guesses as to how they had that information. You have to take into account that despite the fact that Israel has had no presence in the Gaza Strip since 2005, on a daily basis, leading up until October 6th, Gazans were coming into Israel for work, right? They were coming across that border, coming into Israel. We suspect, or we can make an educated guess, that a lot of the information that Hamas had came from people who were working in Israel and going back into Gaza on a daily basis. We're talking about thousands and thousands of people who were coming in here to earn a living. Again, Magen David Adom was very often involved in transferring patients who couldn't receive the medical care they needed in Gaza, were then transferred to Israeli hospitals. And Magen David Adom was very involved, again, almost on a daily basis. Humanitarian aid was going into Gaza all the time. Humanitarian aid by Magen David Adom for people who needed it to get them into Israel was happening on a daily basis. And the Hamas attack destroyed all that.
Yeah, I was watching another podcast. I think it was a podcast, but there's a conversation going on between these two. And one of them made the claim that Hamas actually didn't really kill many people on October 7th, that actually it was the IDF soldiers that killed a lot of their people, killed their own people. Now, I say this because actually Magen David Adom were basically the first responders to this whole situation. And presumably, if there were IDF presence in that area, you would have heard about it through reports, the IDF are here, etc. You didn't hear any of that the IDF were in any of those areas killing their own people?
No. So one of the things, again, because we brought these 30-odd thousand volunteers, it means we have volunteers in every little pocket of Israel. And those volunteers, even in areas that the IDF hadn't arrived at, even in areas that in theory we couldn't send ambulances to, we still had people there. We had EMTs, we had paramedics, we had ambulances on scene, right? Most of the kibbutzim in the south have an ambulance based on the kibbutz with a volunteer ambulance driver, sometimes with paramedics. And we were there and treating people almost in an instant. There were areas that we were then prevented from entering, such as kibbutz Be'eri, such as Kfar Aza. We prevented from entering by the IDF because they were overrun with terrorists and the IDF hadn't dealt with the security situation. There's a lot of communication on a regular basis, on a routine basis, between Magen David Adom and the IDF. There are regular meetings, regular updates to understand what's going on. In this case, we were actually feeding a lot of information to the IDF because we had people on the ground, because we had our teams were actually there treating people. So we were feeding them information that we were receiving from our volunteers, from our staff, who were saying, listen, we're seeing terrorists coming in on gliders. We're seeing terrorists in the streets, on the roads around the kibbutz, in the kibbutz, going from house to house. All that sort of information was being fed to the IDF, and then we were working very much in collaboration with them. But in certain places, in quite a lot of places, we were there a long time before the IDF was.
So given that atrocities were committed that are beyond our imagination, hopefully they're beyond our imagination, how did your people cope going into this, seeing and hearing things that they in their wildest dreams would never have imagined? How do you in that moment deal with it, and what happens afterwards?
So one of the things about being exposed to, and I'm going to take us out of the war situation at the moment and talk about the routine that we deal with on a daily basis. It kind of, and I'm sure it does affect 99.9% of people in one way or another. There is no way you can do this job. And I'm celebrating 22 years today in the world of EMS.
Wow. I guess congratulations.
Without being affected by the things we see, and for better and for worse, we see people at their most extreme, whether that's the loss of a loved one, whether that's delivering babies at the complete other extreme end of that spectrum. What it does do in the vast majority of cases is that it builds a certain level of resilience. And whilst it doesn't make us completely immune to what we're seeing, it does allow us to cope with and to develop coping mechanisms, which are obviously very helpful. Obviously, people saw on that day things that they never expected to see, and you use the word in their wildest dreams, and I would go as far as saying they're definitely not dreams, they are certainly nightmares. And there are systems in place to help people work through what they saw, what they experienced. It starts at a very basic level, even again in routine times, not necessarily during the war. That you sit and you'll discuss with your team what you've just done, right? Even from a basic call, if there's something to be learned from it, we'll do that, and that helps again build up the resilience, build up the understanding. And one of the things that we have to understand sometimes is that there's not always something that we're able to do. And that's a difficult thing to accept. And when it was on such a scale like it was on October 7th, that makes it all that much more difficult. Nevertheless, like I said, there is support in place for those who require it. I think this country has 9.5 million people with some form of PTSD at the moment. And again, there is a certain element of resilience of the fact that we're experiencing it together. We're experiencing it, whether you're talking about Magen David Adom as an organization, whether you're talking about the state of Israel as a whole. You know that you're not the only one going through this. And I think that helps work through or helps us get through those difficulties.
We've heard you a couple of times when we came to Israel and you were talking through some of these things. One of the things you talked about is how, as an ambulance service, you're meant to do certain things in the ambulance, but the rest you leave to when you get to the hospital, and they take on some of the bigger traumatic things. Could you talk a bit about that?
So in trauma cases, our aim is what's known as scoop and run. Pick up your casualty, get them to hospital as quickly as you possibly can, because in most cases, what a trauma casualty needs is an operating room. Right? They need to be, there's very often internal injuries, and if it's an internal injury, that's not something I can deal with as a paramedic on the front line. There could be major bleeds. So what they need right now is to be in surgery. They need to be operated on. So it's not something I want to be playing around with in the field. Right? The quicker I get them to hospital, the quicker they get the treatment, the definitive treatment that they need. That was something that couldn't happen on October 7th for several reasons. The main one being obviously the roads were blocked by terrorists. So we set up treatment centers and we did whatever needed doing on the scene. We stabilized the patients as much as we could. We spoke in the past about a synagogue in a community called Magen, ironically enough, where they set up different areas in the synagogue. One of the areas was for the seriously injured casualties. One of the areas was for the mildly injured casualties. One area was cordoned off, unfortunately, for bodies. And one area is for women in labor. So even that was going on whilst all of this was happening. Again, our aim in routine times is to get our casualties to hospital. Sometimes we can stabilize them on the scene and then get them to hospital. Sometimes we just need to pick them up and get them there as quick as we can. That wasn't an option for us. In a lot of the cases, there are incredible stories of ambulance teams that drove through fields and took routes that were just crazy to get their casualty to hospital as much as they could. Helicopters landing in the firing line. One of our helicopters was actually damaged by rocket fire. While they had casualties on board, they'd just taken off and they got hit by a rocket. Luckily, they managed to land the helicopter and everybody was okay. But again, that ideal of this scoop and run and get to hospital as quickly as we possibly can wasn't something we could do, and we had to adapt, and we had to deal with whatever was happening at the scene until we could eventually evacuate using bulletproof ambulances, using whatever methods were necessary to do so. It just took a much longer time than we would have liked.
Were any of those camps attacked? Those temporary medical facilities that were set up? Were any of those?
No, luckily not. Some were set up in ambulance stations. Some were set up in community centres by the roadside. But luckily, those triage centres, treatment centres, were unscathed. When I say unscathed, I mean directly by terrorists carrying guns walking in. They were still very much targeted by rocket fire, and people were seeking shelter as much as they possibly could. I don't know if you've seen any of the pictures. They basically lined up ambulances at major junctions as rendezvous points, so that bulletproof ambulances that managed to get into the danger zone and bring out casualties handed them over at these rendezvous points, and they were then evacuated to hospital. But these rendezvous points were fields, were open land, no shelters to speak of, and if there were red alerts, the crews basically hid wherever they possibly could for a few seconds, made sure it was safe, and then went back to treating whoever needed treatment.
I'm going to ask a very simple question, but I'm thinking, how on earth do you communicate, coordinate, adapt, let each other know what is going on, knowing that you can go there to rendezvous, that there is a centre set up where they could take patients? I mean, this is so complex. You would think that it would take a month to organise and get people trained for. How did that happen?
So, at a very basic level, first of all, we have one of the most advanced dispatch technologies in the world, developed in-house in Magen David Adom, and that allowed us to coordinate a lot of what needed doing very quickly. Management teams were dealing with setting up these rendezvous points, making sure the communication was working as it should. There were certain areas where the mobile phone system went down, so we used backup systems. And this is something that these are lessons that we've learned for the future. What else needs doing in case there are problems like this in the future? So we've got satellite communications now in place, generators in case there's problems with electricity, community-based first response teams that we're training. We've trained about 11,000 people to provide a level of first aid. If they've got medical training, then we'll use that training. We've given them equipment to then deal with that in the future. But the morning of 7th of October, whatever needed to happen, happened. We set up these treatment centers, and they were set up by people who were basically at the scene. And then they communicated, rather than waiting for an order, for an instruction to come from senior management, they did what needed doing, communicated that back to our dispatch, communicated that back to the management team, and then we understood what was going on. So a lot of it happened thanks to the sort of the dedication of the people who were already there. Sending bulletproof ambulances down from central Israel to the south of Israel was obviously an order that came from higher up. But a lot of people of their own free will and with a desire to go and save lives made their way to the south to go and do whatever they could do, made their way to Magen David Adom ambulance stations, help set up blood drives. So again, in our role as the National Blood Service, we needed to collect quite a lot of blood. And within the first week or so, we collected about a month's worth of supplies of blood. And the blood center we've actually just moved into a new blood center. And it was due to open for operations on the 9th of October. It's unique. It's the only one of its kind in the world that is built where all the labs, all the storage facilities, everything is actually built underground. And we were ready for war. The whole purpose of the way this place was built, the fact that it can continue operations even whilst under rocket fire, threats even of chemical weapons, biological weapons, whatever it is. And that place can still continue operations, means that we are able to supply blood to all of the hospitals across Israel and also to the IDF. We're the IDF's blood bank as well. And to collect that amount of blood, obviously, volunteers came in to do that as well. So we had, on a normal day, we would collect about 1,000 units of blood. On the first day of the war, we collected something like 4,000 units.
Wow.
It was an incredible thing, and that was also thanks to the population here, who understood the gravity of the situation. And even though it was a Shabbat morning, it was a Saturday morning, it was a festival, people still made sure that they came to do whatever they could possibly do. We had people waiting in lines for 8 or 10 hours even just to wait and give blood, because that was the thing they felt that they could do. And Magen David Adom was able to facilitate it.
I know you had such a big response then with people coming. You also recognized that was then going to cause a potential problem. So could you talk about that as well? Because this is like real quick thinking in the midst of this chaos going on, to suddenly think, hang on, this could potentially cause other issues down the line. Could you just explain a bit about that?
So blood donors can only donate once every 3 months in Israel. The problem with that is that the blood units can only be kept for 6 weeks. So our concern was that if everybody came in to donate now, right at the beginning, so whether that was on October 7th, 8th, 9th, that in 6 weeks' time, we weren't going to have enough people to come and donate. So we were concerned that the war was going to go on for obviously an unknown period of time. And that if all of our blood donors come in right at the beginning, it's going to leave us with a problem in 6 weeks, when those who've already donated, or the supplies that have already been donated, have all been depleted. But we don't have enough people to come in and donate now because they all gave kind of at the beginning. One of the interesting facts was that about 50% of the people who came in to donate that day were actually first-time donors, people who've never donated blood before. Our aim, obviously, is to retain these people as regular donors. But it was an incredible thing, and we obviously encourage people with type O blood, because that's the one we can give to everyone, so it's useful, particularly in the army. And one of the things we've been doing with the army is actually trialing a new system where we provide them with what's known as whole blood. Blood units are usually divided into different components used for different purposes. But with the IDF, we've actually been sending the blood, once it's been tested, as whole blood. So a soldier who is injured in battle will receive, if they've lost a pint of blood, they're going to receive a pint of blood with all of its components. And it's something that, along with the rapid evacuations that we've seen, is something that's brought mortality rates with injured soldiers down from 20% to less than 7%. Nothing short of miraculous what's been happening, having blood supplies on the front line with paramedics who are able to administer that blood, paramedics and doctors, almost instantly after a soldier is injured, rather than waiting until they've been evacuated, till they're away from the front line. They're receiving that blood almost immediately. And again,
amazing.
something that's really saving lives.
So where is Magen David Adom today, in the light of, you've had, is it 10 months now? 10 months, and things have been changing even within that. Things are volatile. Where are you at now?
So the state of Israel is obviously facing several fronts. Right? We've got Hezbollah in the north, we've got Iran in the east, we've got the Houthis from Yemen, we've got Hamas, we've got terrorists in the Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. And all of that is ongoing. And as well as all of that ongoing, we've also still got that oxymoron of routine emergencies. So there are still, we're still trying to live our lives. So vast chunks of this country are still experiencing, I wouldn't call it normal life, but as close to normal as we can get it at the moment. But we have to be prepared. We have to be, where an attack from Iran used to be kind of a theoretical exercise. Back in April, we saw that theory can very much be put into practice, and they fired 350 missiles at the state of Israel, putting us again on the highest level of alert we can possibly be. And luckily, thanks to a number of partnerships, I guess, that came into effect, with the countries in the region, with the Iron Dome system, with everything else that was in place, there was only one serious casualty of that attack. Nothing short of a miracle, if you ask me. But we have to be prepared. So we've learned a lot of lessons from October 7th. We're setting up we've set up a project called the Magen Project, right? Magen meaning shield, where we're going to set up medical teams in community-based medical teams. The idea being that, again, if I can't reach a certain area, or if it's going to take me time to get my ambulances to the scene, I want to know that I've got trained people with equipment, with a vehicle, who are able to start providing treatment as soon as possible. I'm sure you heard about the awful disaster that we had in the north of Israel, in Majd al-Shams, just a few days ago, where Hezbollah rocket hit a football field, soccer field, and 12 children were killed. And several more were injured. Two of the people who responded almost immediately to that call were doctors who live in that community, members of the Druze community, and they'd just undergone training with Magen David Adom to become part of this Magen team. They had MDA equipment with them, and they were able to start treating very, very quickly. And this is a concept that we're looking at for whatever might happen in the future. Again, it might be an earthquake that strikes the region, and we'll have to deal with that. We won't be able to get ambulances to certain areas, but I want to know that I've got local, community-based, trained, equipped people who are able to deal with it. So we've trained, since the beginning of the war, we've trained about 11,000 people as part of this project. We've provided training to thousands more members of the public just to give them basic first aid skills. And you'd think that, having seen what we've seen, that people would be a little bit reticent, a little bit concerned about volunteering with Magen David Adom, but actually the requests for people to join us to do training, to become EMTs, to become even paramedics, has actually gone up. So we're seeing a big demand from people who want to join Magen David Adom, who want to have that life-saving skill should anything else occur. And we're preparing for what might happen. We're preparing for blackout scenarios. So again, making sure we've got generators in strategic locations around the country, making sure we have satellite communications so that if the mobile phone system goes down, the cell phone system goes down, we're able to still communicate. Having systems in place that if, God forbid, we end up in a situation where we have to literally go back into the Stone Age, that we're sending people around on Magen David Adom vehicles, just scanning the streets, driving up and down, making sure that if somebody needs Magen David Adom, they'll still be able to reach us. Drills that have been held dealing with mass casualty events under rocket fire. What happens if, whilst you're treating, something else occurs at the same time? Drills of how do we treat people if there is a blackout? Right? If we've got no electricity, what do we do then? Preparing for anything that might come this way. We've imported hundreds of new vehicles, ambulances, intensive care units, first response vehicles since the beginning of the war to try and increase the availability, to make sure that whatever happens, and again, you have to take into account also the non-war issues. So the population growing in the state of Israel. I moved to Israel 12 and a half years ago. There were about 7.5 million people living here. There's now almost 10 million people living here. So we have to take that into account as well. We're always looking to how we can make things better, how we can respond in a quicker way. You had a walk around our dispatch room, and you saw the response times for somebody to pick up a phone usually sits on an average of 2 seconds for a call that comes in from anywhere across Israel. We want to make sure that we can keep that up. We've just opened a new dispatch center in the blood center, which is, again, it's about 20 meters underground in a protected facility, making sure that whatever happens, we're able to still continue providing a service to the people of Israel.
You just made a lot of people feel sick about their own emergency response times to phone calls. What was the response time during October 7th?
Went up to about 24 seconds.
24
average.
Seconds.
And
unbelievable.
That's even though the call rate went up by a multiple of about 7. So on a regular Saturday, we would take about 3,500 calls. On that day, we took between 7 a.m. and 11 p.m., we took about 21,500 calls. And many of those calls were actually much longer than a normal call would be, because we were giving guidance. We were trying to explain how we were going to get to the casualties, how we could direct the casualties to come to us, how do we expect someone to stop the bleeding. There's a horrendous call, I think you heard, of a child who's hiding in a closet looking after his sister and just witnessed his parents being killed by the terrorists, and again being with them, trying to encourage them, trying to explain what to do, how to keep themselves safe. So the calls are much longer, but again, we brought in thousands of volunteers, whether that was on the front line, in the ambulances, in the intensive care units, whether that was people who came into the dispatch rooms, whether that was people who came in to help with blood services, whatever was needed. We are extremely grateful and thankful that we have this huge volunteer base who we can rely on, that the second we put out a call to say we need help, we know they're going to be there.
As we come to the end, I'm just thinking maybe people don't know the extent of how far Israel goes to help other people. You mentioned earlier on about how they go to all these different countries. And from what I understand, I guess this is still the case, but I think every country's traveling medical team, whatever that looks like, have to meet certain criteria. And Israel has the highest level. Is that correct? Do you know what I'm talking about?
So again, because we act also as the Red Cross Society, so the people who are part of the Red Cross missions are EMTs, are paramedics, will be sometimes nurses, doctors. So they're trained on a regular basis as part of their duties within Magen David Adom. It means that, again, we're kind of ready for anything. And the other thing you have to take into account is we have people who represent every sector of Israeli society. 20% of the population in Israel, in the Jewish state, are actually non-Jews, whether they are Christians, whether they're Muslims, whether they are Druze, whether they are from different parts of the world, multiple languages. And we're able to use that, again, very much to our benefit and also for the benefit of the people that we are going out to help. So if I'm working on an ambulance and my driver happens to be a Muslim Arab, which happens on a very frequent basis, it means that if we are called to a Muslim family, to a family that speaks Arabic, he'll be able to communicate with them and will understand the sensitivities maybe a little bit more. And we have members of Magen David Adom from within every single community, the Bedouin community, the ultra-Orthodox community, everything, meaning that we kind of touch every part of society. We're very much a microcosm of Israeli society as well, which gives us, I think, a huge advantage in being able to connect with the people that we're there to treat.
Now, one of the things I was going to say off the back of that is that maybe people don't realize it, but even outside of October 7th related conflicts, Israel has provided medical attention to many terrorists that have either committed terrorist acts and then end up in Israeli hospital, or in Israeli hospital and then go on to commit terrorist attacks. But this is something that Israel does fairly regularly. Is this something that you also had to do after October 7th? Did you end up finding people, terrorists that came in to commit these acts that you needed to help medically? And if so, I mean, how do people, I mean, it must be so difficult for an Israeli to see this person's just done this to my people. Now let me help save this person's life.
So this is a very simple theoretical answer, and a not always so simple practical answer. The theory is that as a paramedic, my role is very simple. My role is to save lives. On October 7th and then in the days following, I didn't personally have to deal with any terrorists. A very close friend of mine did. On the 8th of October, in the early hours of that day, she was treating one of the Hamas terrorists who broke into Israel. And she knew it at the time. And it puts us in a very, very difficult position. I've had to treat terrorists in the past. I actually worked in an area that's right next door to a security prison. So we would quite often get calls in there for people who we either suspected or knew were involved in terrorist activity. And it's an emotionally difficult thing to deal with. But on the other hand, my role is very simple. I'm not the judge, nor the jury, nor the executioner. My role is to treat a human being for whatever they need treating for at the time. What the security services have to do, that's their role, that's their decisions, that's their call. just a few months ago, so since the beginning of the war, there was a terrorist attack actually very close to where I live, and I was at home at the time. And one of our volunteers who had an ambulance at home was sent to the call, and I called him up. I said, pick me up on the way. So I went on this call, civilian clothing. I wasn't even in uniform. And we turned up at the scene, and there were three victims, three casualties. And those three had already been dealt with by crews that got there even quicker than we did, which I found astonishing, because we were there within about 6 minutes of the incident, and the three casualties were already on their way to hospital. And they said there's another casualty about 3 miles from where we are, 2 miles from where we are. We know that somebody was involved. We're not sure. We think it might be the terrorist. We headed to the scene. We found it was the terrorist. He'd actually been shot by the security services, and they told us to wait before we approached him, just so they could make sure that there were no explosive devices, to make sure the scene was safe for us to attend. So we waited on scene, and then we eventually reached this casualty, and my role is to treat him. There was a doctor there on the scene as well, who actually took over the treatment. But there's no question at the time that we are there to do a job, and that job is to treat casualties, to treat patients. Is it sometimes very, very difficult emotionally? 100%. I can't, it's not something I can deny. Is it something that I would love to avoid having to do in future? Absolutely, no question. But again, it's the reality of life in Israel, and there will be times that we have to treat the terrorists, and we treat them, and then we leave it to the security services, whether that's the police, whether that's the IDF, whether that's the judicial system, whatever it is, to play their role in that story.
Well, all I can say is, when we came to see you with our teams, I was full of admiration. I'm just blown away. It is almost beyond my imagination to even take on board everything that you've said. And just as we're finishing, I would just like to say to people who are listening, do go to these sites that Andrew will put below. There are ways that you can support Magen David Adom where you are, from the nations, the different countries, and we need to do our part by getting behind you and doing what we can.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether you heard that noise, whether that transmitted across to you just now.
I heard a little bleep or something.
Right, so my phone's actually on silent, but the only thing that still makes noise is the red alerts. So there's a red alert right now as we speak. Just gonna have a look and see exactly where it is. Up in the north. So rocket alerts happening, and it's again something else that I think is missed by a large chunk of the world, is the fact that October 7th was just the beginning. And we've had rocket alerts and terror attacks pretty much every single day since then. And it's something that we get it
on ours as well, so we're watching with you.
So you're seeing it as well.
Yeah.
And we've got teams up in the north, even in the areas that have been evacuated. I'm sure you're aware, tens of thousands of Israelis have been evacuated from their homes now, mainly along the northern border with Lebanon, but also along the southern border with Gaza. For safety reasons, but these rockets that are being fired are not just getting to the areas that have been evacuated. They are attacking areas where there is still a civilian population, and we still have teams in all of those areas, including the areas that have been in theory evacuated, just to make sure that we can provide a response to anybody who's in the area.
Hopefully this will give people a far greater insight into what it means to be a part of Magen David Adom and the service there that you provide to help people, both Israeli but also terrorists, and some of the struggles, whether that be in providing the service or even emotionally and wrestling through some of the things you have to do. But we've really enjoyed getting to know you and hear you share some when we've met with you in Israel.
And if you want to come and meet face to face and come out and go to the station and meet, message us, because we are going to continue to take teams out there, and we would love more of you to join us.
Yeah, so Aryeh, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking this time And hopefully this will help open people's eyes and give them more information in terms of what happened from October 7th through to now, to be able to help combat some of the lies that maybe they're hearing in the media in terms of what happened and how things were handled. So thank you so much.
Thank you
Thank you for giving me your time.
much. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Remember, if it inspired you, share it with others so we can see more people engaged in this community.